Okay, so you want to own a piece of the subway, not a shovel of dirt under it, not a train. A piece of the thing millions of people walk through every day without looking up. There's a station in Brooklyn where a bank's name has been bolted to the wall for 2 decades. Barclays paid $200,000 a year, 20 years, $4 million total, to fuse its name onto a stop most riders use without ever wondering who paid for it. Here's the part that changes everything. Barclays doesn't own that station. Nobody outside one public authority ever will. The tracks, the platform, the tile on the wall belong permanently to the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and none of it is for sale. What you can buy, in a few narrow ways, is a contract, a recurring bill attached to infrastructure you'll never control. And whether that bill turns into a good investment or a disaster depends on something you don't get a vote on, whether people keep riding the train. The MTA is a New York State public authority. It answers to the state legislature and a governor-appointed board, not shareholders, and its physical assets can't be privatized or sold off. So owning a subway station was never on the table. What's on the table are three narrow doors, and all three are more restrictive than they look. Door 1, naming rights. The MTA adopted a formal policy in 2012, refreshed again in August 2024, letting sponsors attach their name to a station with a real geographic tie. In the entire history of that policy, exactly one deal has closed. Barclays, in 2009, before the formal rules even existed. Every other proposal since has stalled. One transaction in over 15 years. Door 2, retail leases. The system has roughly 195 commercial retail spaces built into stations. As of a 2024 count, only about 52 were open, around 27% occupancy, and some of the highest foot traffic real estate in the country. 20 more were under construction, 31 under negotiation, the rest dark. Door 3, advertising. Not a marketplace at all, a single exclusive concession. One company holds the right to sell every ad space across the subway, bus, and rail network. Since 2017, that's been Outfront Media. You're not bidding against other landlords. You're buying from the one company holding the only key. So owning a piece of the subway means one closed naming deal in 15 years, a retail footprint 3/4 vacant, and a single gatekeeper standing between every advertiser and the entire system. Start with the cheapest door, retail. Vacant stand reporting has put newsstand kiosk rent as low as $500 a month, a rounding error next to street level Manhattan retail. But rent was never the number that mattered. A newsstand's margin runs about 20% on print, with candy and bottled drinks just keeping the register moving between newspaper sales. Then daily paper sales fell roughly 90% over 2 decades, on top of rent, insurance, transit authority utility fees, and municipal price caps on what a stand can even charge. The rent wasn't the obstacle, the business underneath it collapsed, and the rent kept coming due anyway. That's why 3 of every 4 of those spaces sit empty today. Now the expensive door, advertising. Outfront Media didn't just agree to pay rent for ad space. Its 2017 concession obligated it to build the infrastructure itself. Over 50,000 digital displays, system-wide, part of a commitment reported at roughly $1,100,000,000 in capital. Buying into a single McDonald's franchise runs $1 to $2 million all in. Outfront committed over 1,000 times that before it sold a single impression just to hold the right to try. On top of that build-out sits the number that defines the whole relationship. Outfront owes the MTA whichever is larger, a percentage of revenue collected, or a fixed guaranteed minimum due no matter what. That minimum has been stepping up about 3% a year, on track to hit roughly $161 million in a single year by 2026. Here's the mechanism that actually runs all 3 of these doors, and it's not the MTA makes money off ads and rent. It's this. Every one of these contracts is structured so the MTA keeps the upside and hands the downside to whoever signed the deal. That guaranteed minimum clause in the Outfront contract isn't a floor that protects the operator. It's a floor that protects the MTA. If ridership spikes and ad revenue booms, the MTA collects its cut of the boom. If ridership craters, the MTA still collects the guaranteed minimum. Outfront absorbs the entire gap between what the ads actually earned and what the contract says is owed out of its own cash. The retail leases work on the same logic in miniature. Fixed rent, price caps set by the city, and an operator who eats every dollar of declining foot traffic himself. Even the naming rights deal is one-directional. Barclays locked in a fixed annual number for 20 years regardless of how the neighborhood, the station, or the arena next door performed over that time. You are never buying a share of subway ridership. You are buying a fixed obligation that sits on top of subway ridership, and the person who wrote the contract made sure the obligation doesn't move even when the ridership does. The clearest place to watch that mechanism break someone is Outfront Media in 2020. When COVID hit, subway ridership fell by something close to 90% within weeks. Outfront's actual advertising revenue followed it down. Second quarter 2020 revenue came in at $232.9 million, down from $459.9 million a year earlier, essentially cut in half. Adjusted operating income for that same quarter fell 74.3%, down to $37.4 million. Third quarter revenue was down 39% year over year. For the full year, adjusted operating income fell 46.4%, a decline of over $232 million in a single year. The company suspended its dividend entirely in the first quarter and drew down the full $500 million available on its credit line just to stay liquid. And here's the part that proves the mechanism rather than just describing a bad year. The MTA's guaranteed minimum payment did not go away. It didn't even meaningfully shrink. In August 2021, Outfront and the MTA signed an amendment, and the relief in that amendment wasn't a discount on what was owed. It stretched the contract term from 10 years to 13, and it reduced the number of digital screens Outfront was obligated to install from over 50,000 down to about 5,400. The filing spells out explicitly that these changes were Outfront's sole remedy for the entire impact of the pandemic. Not forgiveness, not a reduced guarantee, more time, and a smaller build-out target. Every dollar of the guaranteed payment structure stayed intact, including a leftover $11.7 million deferred payment from that exact shortfall, still showing up in the company's filings years later, in 2026. The pandemic erased the ridership. It didn't erase the invoice. Run the two scenarios side by side, using the structure that's actually in these contracts. In a good year, ridership is normal, the ad market is healthy, and Outfront's actual revenue share comfortably clears the guaranteed minimum. Say the concession earns the MTA's percentage cut off of strong, full-price advertising sales across a healthy subway system. The guarantee becomes irrelevant because real revenue sails past it, and whatever's left above that line is Outfront's margin to keep. That's the year where owning the concession looks like a great business. High fixed obligation, but revenue so far above it that the fixed number barely registers. In a bad year, the 2020 year, ridership collapses, ad revenue collapses with it, and the guaranteed minimum stops being a formality and becomes the entire story. Revenue falls by roughly 40 to 50%, exactly like it did, but the payment owed to the MTA barely moves, because it was never tied to performance in the first place. The gap between what came in and what was contractually owed doesn't get absorbed by the public authority that owns the tracks. It gets absorbed by drawing a credit line to zero, cutting the dividend to nothing, and negotiating for more time rather than less debt. Same contract, same guaranteed number on the page, two completely different outcomes, and the only variable that moved between them was ridership, which the operator never controlled in the first place. That's not a risk you're pricing when you sign one of these deals. That's a risk you're simply accepting sight unseen, for however many years the contract runs. Strip away the specific numbers, and all three doors turn out to be the same door. The naming rights, the retail leases, the advertising concession, every one lets you attach your name, your product, or your capital to a public asset you will never own, control, or meaningfully influence. What you're actually purchasing is the right to carry risk a public authority decided it didn't want to carry itself. Fixed payments that don't bend when ridership does, price caps that don't lift when costs rise, guarantees that survive a pandemic that erased 90% of the customers who were supposed to make the whole thing pencil out. None of that makes these deals irrational. Businesses take on price risk for a living. It just means a piece of the busiest transit system in the country, was never really for sale. You never bought a piece of the subway. You bought the invoice the government didn't want to hold, and it comes due whether or not a single train runs on time.